Mama, but it's mom. But it's mom.
Here in Arab countries, nobody can say goodbye. Nobody know when the government want to take him, catch him, or kill him. Maybe I can't say goodbye, Sean.
Really?
When they catch me, yeah. Of course.
You just disappear.
Just disappear.
What I noticed, Sean, is that you have preferred to hold the camera yourself as the storyteller or as the filmmaker, as opposed to having a large crew. Perhaps, I mean, it so seems. Is there any particular reason behind that you are so close to these stories that you want to do the camera work also yourself, or am I wrong in saying that?
I just want to be able to be free, to be alone, to be filming, to forge the best relationship I can and the closest relationship with the things I'm filming, the people I'm filming. I found it early in the days of starting to make films that I was struggling with making. I was struggling with communicating more with the crew, and the crew was the barrier to my subject. So for me, it just seemed so logical from the beginning, unfortunately, that I couldn't. It's very lonely to work on your own, but once you start to use your connection with the subjects, in a way, you see, I felt that the distance in a lot of films was because the director and the crew have to have a relationship in order to make the film. What I do is get rid of the crew and have that relationship with the subjects, so that then brings the audience much closer to the subject and to the material and to the intimacy and inside the life. So I always feel that the crew brings you somehow further out of that intimacy, and there's that and also not really. I think the beauty of documentary is the surprise of never knowing what is happening. And if you have a crew and you have a camera person, they usually want to know what they're doing every day. And I don't know sometimes what time I'm waking up, and I don't want to. I'd like to have that same freedom. So I embed, like in a Syrian love story, I had a bed in the house. I became a member of the family in a sense. And some of those sequences could only have been filmed because of that connection, that relationship, that trust. And that's through not having a crew, in my opinion.
This makes so much sense, Sean, because you are right that in many documentaries we sense this distance. So characters are not spontaneous. They don't look very spontaneous or natural. They look as if they were conscious of the camera. Now, there were many journalists, Sean, or filmmakers who perhaps overemphasize the camera skills, cinematography, that you have to be absolutely correct, that the exposure has to be right, the focus has to be right. And like in your film, A Syrian Love Story, there were many scenes where one could argue that, oh, the camera work was not very well. Why was there so much of noise? It was pixelating, etc., etc. But when you watch, when anybody watches your film, this question never arises that camera is important. Although yes, camera is there. So Yes, absolutely. I agree with you that we have to err on the side of the story and closeness with the characters.
I think conversely, if you think about if you think about how many documentaries you watch and how many fiction films you watch, where the camera work is wonderful, but the content lets you down, or the character lets you down, or the intimacy lets you down. I think that's the other way to think about it. I look at lots of stuff that's beautiful, but that's soulless somehow. So I don't intend to have a wobbly camera, but I also never shied away from the wobbly camera, because for me it made the moment real. And with the editor, we could cut around the camera movement, but then the editor said, I love that camera movement, because in a sense that movement adds to that dramatic tension of the scene. So actually you use that as an aesthetic, use that aesthetic for dramatical purposes as well.
The film has been shot over a period of time. It has like four years. I'm not sure. So was that in your mind before you started shooting, or it just happened eventually as the film went on?
The film was not commissioned the film was filmed over 5 years, and the film was not commissioned until the year 4. So the film was a labor of love. In a way, it was a real experience. I went to Syria in whatever year it was before the revolution, 2009, 2010. And I was looking for a story, and I came across the story. And when I got arrested and they had to flee, they were then in Lebanon, and I was back in the UK. I was then trying to get the film commissioned, and I couldn't get the film commissioned, but I also couldn't leave them in a way. I felt an obligation to help them. So I would be returning to help them and carrying on, seeing them in Lebanon. In fact, the BBC sent me to Greece to try and make a film about the financial crash in Greece. And I was using the money that they sent me to go to Greece to fly from Athens to Beirut to visit the family, and carrying on filming and helping them somehow. It was very, and then even in when they got to France, I'm not sure. I sometimes wonder whether some of the sequences that we filmed were so intimate that they let everything be filmed, because they had lost any belief that there was ever going to really be a film. That I was Sean that was just always coming around with the camera, So there was never any grand aim with the film. It was a real genuine friendship, and that I would film as I was going along at different stages, really. And I got drawn into the drama really in France, because when they got to the south of France and the relationship started to deteriorate, they would call me and ask me to come from London, because they couldn't make sense of the situation they were in. But because I had seen their life before, at least I was somebody that knew their backstory and somebody that they could connect with, I suppose. So I suppose that filming those sequences when the relationship was deteriorating was even more intimate, because they were actively asking me to come and be a part and help in some way. And I think that's what happens if you're working more intimately on your own and without a crew, that you're more of a human being than a camera. Yamuk,
Yes.
you're home.
Yes.
Shit.
Yes, my friend.
This is him.
Yes, my friend. This is me. I am here.
How old was he?
25.
Why was he killed?
Bomb in street. You're going in university, bomb street. Yes. Beautiful girl. She killed. She.
No.
Yeah.
She was going to get married. Did she get married?
uh, Language comes as a barrier.
I work through it really. I like the attempt to connect and communicate, and I think that, like the camera work, can have a drama. So I have worked with translators where people can speak freely and easily, but for me it becomes quite emotionless. And what's more emotionful is an attempt to speak. So I'm also making a film at the moment in Japan. The character really struggles with his English. Not really struggles, but it slows him down in how he can express himself. But in terms of cinematic value on the screen, it's more powerful. When I bring the Japanese translator in, and we did, and he speaks and speaks and speaks, it's like a machine gun firing bullets. And actually, the translator said, this stuff is no good. The stuff where he's speaking to you in English is beautiful because it's meaningful and it's an attempt to be really connecting with you. When you get rid of that and it's just freedom to speak, it's somehow, for me, it just takes away the drama, and there's an immediacy and connection. But I don't think it's always that. Like when Amma and Ragda would then have the discussion with themselves, I would let them go into Arabic and be an observer, not necessarily understanding what I'm filming. But as long as I've got the context through being, and also as long as I'm invited, the camera needs to feel like it's invited into a scene, and that Sean, the filmmaker, whoever, is not voyeuristic and it's invited. So I think there's a way of working where you can get the connection between you and them, but then also let them express themselves in the mother tongue when they're fighting, arguing, or having fun or whatever, But I think sometimes the translator takes me out of the picture, and the connection and the strength of the drama is that connection between me and them. So I don't want that to break, and often the translator will get in the way of that. But I can understand people watching the film and saying, oh, but they're struggling to speak English. Why don't you get a translator? It would be so much easier. Yeah, it would be so much easier, but it wouldn't be what you've just seen. It wouldn't be that film. And that's why I didn't do that. I purposely didn't do that, in the same way that I purposely didn't bring a tripod and I purposely didn't bring a crew.
Because of the kind of documentaries that you are making where things are still unfolding, so I presume that you do not seek to structure your story, or you do not prepare a script before you start working on a film. Is that right? And do you think that it's all right always that you do not have a script and you are writing, or sorry, you have started shooting? Or is it that you are avoiding films where you have to do retrospection, that things have already happened and then you go there and then you start working on a film?
I don't know what you mean by script, because there's so many different ways of interpreting what a documentary is now. I work in Calcutta on the Dockhead pit, and I've been working over in Bangladesh on the Dakar pit. So there's many different ways in which I can see that different institutions require a treatment proposal. I mean, I do the treatment and proposal because I think it can collect your mind and your thoughts. But to be honest, I think you can spend as much time perfecting that in the same way that you can spend as much time making a 3-minute teaser as you can making the film. I think I don't have a script that tells me what to do on the day, but equally, I don't believe that you can just go randomly in and shoot anything. So I think the problem with my films, sometimes people feel I just show up and hope, I just randomly kind of film whatever happens. But there's a very, very careful consideration for casting the character, and also for observing. Part of the reason for living with a family or for spending time filming and living with them and getting inside there is to observe a pattern of what happens so that you know what to film, even if it's subconscious. So it might be the same answer to what you're saying. My script is scripted in my head. I always say that your head is like your computer. It has to be logging what you're looking at and thinking about and seeing what you're seeing and seeing what you missed because you were not shooting, and waiting to think about how you can get that again. Or if you shot it and you didn't ask the question correctly, you didn't get the answer. It's not just, there is a method to the madness. I think you need to know what questions you're asking to make a documentary. And sometimes you can be in a situation where the sequences are happening and you don't know what to ask, in which case you haven't quite got your research right, because in order to make that scene fully work, I think you need to know why you're there and what you're asking. Otherwise, you've wasted that opportunity. So I think it's a different way to what we get to. If you have to write a script and it helps you make the finished film, but I don't really understand those documentaries that write a script and literally go and shoot that script. I find that quite, in documentary anyway, but I suppose there's different types of documentary. There are more structured documentaries. And what I'm playing with is a genre of documentary that is making narrative drama out of real life. It's narrative, character-driven drama out of real life, out of the randomness of real life. But in order to make drama work, you have to get the central conflict to create that drama and to get that drama on screen. You have to convince the characters to be present and to let you film them naked and almost invisible. Because if it's working really well, like I think in A Syrian Love Story, it works like the strength of a powerful fiction film. That Amma and Ragda are two lovers caught in this conflict, the impossibility of love set against the backdrop of a Syrian revolution. So in retrospect, it's easy to look at that and write the script now when you look at the film, or to write the script now, to write the synopsis now. It's great, great little. But I didn't know what that was then, and it's constantly changing with the unpredictability of life. 1 minute they're in Lebanon, the next minute she's arrested, next minute I'm arrested, the next minute they're in France. But if you're thinking about it as a fiction, and here's the thing, if you're thinking about it as a fiction film, there are two lovers that met before and dreamed of the overthrow of Assad. She's in prison and he's looking after the kids. The revolution starts and their struggle means that she's released. The government gave her. So he's dreamed of raising his kids in the West, and they managed to get to the West. Hollywood, happy ending, surely they've got to be in love at the end. And I wanted that. But the beauty of documentary is the truth. 1 in 2 marriages of refugees breaks up. No one really sees that because no one really cares, I suppose.
You take projects which would take you 1 year, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years. You can, in a way, afford to give so much time to one film. But we, because of financial reasons, I would say that what we end up doing is that we make shorter documentaries, you could call them mini documentaries. And we are mostly doing retrospection. Something has already happened. And then we say that, okay, let's make a film about that. That's where scripting comes in handy, that, okay, because we know what has happened, so let's identify elements of the story, what's the conflict here, how do we show it. So perhaps, which is why there is this difference. Okay, anyone else would want to ask a question? Tarini, do you want to?
Yeah, my question is, I mean, first I just want to say that I was really blown away by the intimacy that is on the screen in both films. And one like stylistic decision that I noticed across both your films was that not only are you I mean, you are the camera person yourself, but also you're a very real character in the films. Like Sean is a very big part of both films as a character. So I mean, for me, that makes it all the more authentic. But I was just wondering if that, I was wondering what your views on journalistic or documentary making objectivity is. Like, what do you think becoming a character in the film compromises objectivity, and what are your views on journalistic objectivity in documentary filmmaking?
I think there's always that question. The BBC still like to believe that the news can be objective. And I think that I don't think that it ever could be. So I think that when I was learning about documentary filmmaking, there was this term called fly on the wall filmmaking, which would be that you would be in the room, in the corner, and there would be just talking, and they'd forget that you were there. And I didn't even like that. I thought that that was somehow sneaky and insincere. And in my time studying documentary filmmaking, I came across a term from America, I believe, which was fly in the soup, which was that you would actually just pile in there and make your presence very, very much felt. And so it freed me up to be myself. And I think when I was learning how to make films, what I was also learning, it was almost like what was my shoe size? What was the kind of shoes I was wanting to wear? I think when I teach filmmaking now, you see a lot of students aspiring to be something, aspiring to be someone that they respect, instead of trying to find their own qualities that suit them. And what I found was, I think it's just finding, very simply put, finding your voice in filmmaking. So I just found that I could be, if I could be me behind the camera. And I think I was also watching the work of people like Michael Moore, which is he's a bit of a bigger presence, and in my opinion, too much of a presence. But still, I think what he enabled was also a bit of sense of fun. I also noticed that there was too many boring documentaries, to be quite honest. And there's too many respectful kind of, and what that Michael Moore approach did was, again, it just freed me up to be me, not having the crew, just having the characters and me, creating that ambience and connection, and just go with the flow, really. And then I think what you create between that, in that space, is a truth that then takes you out of that realm of, was it objective, wasn't it objective, did it politically convey the whole answer to the Syrian revolution, or did it just convey the left or the right? It didn't. It just talked about two people and their story and this stranger that steps into that world, really. It doesn't try to pretend, I don't think. I'm kind of very circumspect about any of their subjectivity. I don't believe in any of it, really.
how hard it is to navigate doing journalism in conflicted areas?
It's very difficult in conflicted areas. I'm trying to make a film again. I made a film before also in Yemen, which is quite difficult. And I'm trying to get back to Yemen now. And I'm still trying to make that type of film that you've seen. And the reason I'm trying to make that type of film with that connection with Amma and Ragda is because we only ever see international conflict in the space of a 30-minute CNN report, or if you're lucky, a 3-minute chunk. And you never really see the bigger space on the sofa of people laughing and crying, and a multifaceted understanding of many different faces. So now currently, the Syrian conflict, the Yemeni story is just despair. And it is despair. My dilemma is my character and me have a very funny relationship. So my teaser's quite funny. And so I've got this kind of conflict trying to present a film where there's cholera, there's now the virus, there's a despair beyond belief. But in actual fact, the relationship I've got with this character is uniquely comical because he's a very switched on former tour guide who understands the world in a bigger, more interesting way. And I think that is exactly what we need, because at the moment, all we see is this very narrow perspective of people that fit an expectation of what we think they should be. And I think what we can do in documentary is challenge that expectation. And it's often a developed stereotype that comes from the news, because the news only has 3 minutes to tell that story, and then it's on to the next story, like a magazine. I make story dramas from the living rooms of people's lives, where the news cameras never often get. So if you go to a social context, like, say, Yemen, especially in Japan, actually, it took me a year working in Japan to get invited into a Japanese person's home, because it's one of those things that they just don't do. The film that I made starts with them sleeping in bed, which is unseen of. You don't see that in Japanese documentary. Do you know what I mean? So you, again, as the stranger, you can go in and break those kind of rules. But I just think intimacy, if you're working within the private space, if you're invited into the private space with your characters, within a short film that you're making, it's a 10-minute film that you're making over a few weeks, you can be working in a more interesting space if that's your ambition,
How did you decide the days of shooting? Because you didn't shoot every day. So how did you get to know about the incidences that were happening in their lives, and how did you go and shoot? So
I wake up in the morning. I'll tell you what I notice is, if I don't feel like I really want to film, I shouldn't bother, because the scenes, you can film a scene, but unless I'm driven to engage in the scene, ask the questions, and really want to get something out of the scene, it's not going to work. That's what I've noticed. So I have to be in the right frame of mind to often make a scene work. So I think I commit. I think, when you pan, when I'm teaching camera work, when you pan, you commit to panning. If you suddenly pan back, it starts to look a bit messy. So for me, even if I'm panning to the right, I've committed. So even if Amma is then speaking on the left, I've committed to pan to the right, and I will follow the pan through, which will then be a usable shot, even though he's speaking. Now, when I'm filming like that, I also have to be aware, because I don't have a sound person, that when my pan pans from the person speaking, I lose the sound as well. But I think it's a commit. You commit to that movement. In the same way, in my head, I commit to either really filming today or hanging out a bit today. And I always have the camera with me. So if something happens, it's often spontaneous, and I start to film. and then it goes into something. And often the thing that you start filming that you think is the scene springboards into something more interesting that becomes the scene. I'm also interested in finding what I call the drama of the non-event. So the big scenes bother me because often if I'm getting up in the morning to film a big scene, usually a big scene on paper isn't a big scene emotionally on screen. It depends if something really happens. I'm much more interested in discovering the drama of the non-events. If for one reason someone's not talking, or someone's a bit moody, or something's happened, and there's a tension in the air, there's something much more interesting to explore than the big scene. So I kind of, but again, that's also the beauty of being in a situation and not having not being too far away from what you film. The beauty of that Syrian film was that I didn't sleep in a hotel. I slept in their place a lot of the time. So you wake up and you're in the scene. If you're in a hotel and you go around to film, for a lot of the time you're going through security, you're getting there, you get 3 hours there before you have to leave again. And those 3 hours, you've got 1 hour to sort of say hello and get relaxed again. That only leaves a very small window to get something more than an interview. You're not really observing anything. You're going in and doing what most documentary films do, which is to take an interview, the talking head, and disappear. I think what we should be doing is going in to whatever we're filming and being the witness to whatever we're filming, and filming bits here and there that then visually tell a story, because you're the witness to that.
I just wanted to share an observation that I saw in your the Syrian love story. So every time any emotional incident happened, like when the lady called from jail, and when the couple fought, so you interviewed the children and they brought those emotions in the story. So that was really interesting, that every time any emotional incident is happening, you have interviewed and you have tried to get what children are thinking. That was very interesting thing that I observed in the story.
I think the other thing to think about is that the editor is working with hundreds of hours of material. So when you're thinking about that, it's not like that happened and then I went into the bedroom to interview. It's maybe taken from 8 hours of material that night, where I've been filming for 3 or 4 hours with them two, and there's a point to which arguments you can only go so far. But then for what I would find sometimes I was locked out of, for whatever reason, I was pushed away, and I was in the kids' bedroom just hanging out. So I would just then film the kids because I was just hanging out, So again, it wasn't kind of conscious, but yeah. And then I think what we do with the editing in this approach is we then take the moments that somehow piece the story and tell and make sense of the story, and the kids narrating the parents' lives is also fascinating in a way, that the kids are so articulate to kind of make sense of the world that the parents are lost in is also kind of, it's kind of heart rendering in a way. Especially the scene when I came back and Ragda had tried to kill herself, and the little boy gives this graphic description of his memory. That, in a way, if you think about that in documentary terms, the braver film, even if you had that material, which I didn't have, if you had that material where Ragda had tried to kill herself, which was very horrific, blood all over the flat, ambulances, flashing blue lights, everything television loves in a documentary. emotionally, in a cinematic experience, the drama of the non-event, there's something much more powerful about the way it's conveyed through Little Bob. My journalistic understanding of what I do is when I go to like Yemen now, I want to find somebody that can articulate the situation, but not like a specialist, not like in an investigative journalistic piece. But so you're looking for, number one, somebody that's articulate, and number two, somebody that's emotionally attached to something like the family. So the character I have has this struggle with his wife. She's constantly telling him to make more money and find the kids and threatening to divorce him. So immediately you have something that's very tangible and real on a human level that I think is universal and which I think is helpful to something like Yemen, because I feel, thinking of my friends in the north of England who don't engage in international journalism, most people around the world are only interested in stories from their own situation, from their own lives. So that our challenge as filmmakers and as journalists trying to bring in an understanding of the international world is how to make it universal for people to connect. So I look for the personal and the political. So you have a narrative which has got a bigger political picture, but also has a much more intimate personal thread, so that person that wouldn't normally go to Yemen can go, even if it's just because they're following the plight of him struggling to keep his marriage alive, because they connect with that. Maybe they don't understand the full understanding of the Yemeni politics that you're trying to bring in the picture, in the film, but that's enough for me. It's enough to have engaged them to stay till the end. So the next time they turn on the news and Yemen comes on, they're in Yemen a little bit more than they were before because of that character that you chose in that film. I think that's what we can do to make people understand the world in a more interesting way.
Thank you. We fully believe in that, Sean. And we actually at Stories Asia, we cover South and Southeast Asia. So there are about 16 countries. But yes, it's a challenge that we don't look only at our situation in my city, in my country, but allow our empathy to cross boundaries, national boundaries, and all other boundaries that we have. And we claim that we want to do that, and I just hope humbly that we will start doing that. Yeah, thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you.